Emily Carter never imagined that moving back to Willow Creek would lead her straight into a nightmare, but the real shock came when she discovered that the killer terrorizing her hometown was none other than her ex-boyfriend Mark Dillon, a man she once loved and trusted with her life. Willow Creek was the kind of place people described as picture-perfect. The streets were lined with old oak trees that turned brilliant shades of orange and gold each fall, and the small downtown was a collection of cozy cafes, antique shops, and friendly faces. Everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. Neighbors waved from their porches, children rode their bikes along quiet roads, and doors were rarely locked. For decades, life in the town moved at a gentle, predictable pace. But all of that changed one chilly October evening when a single crime shattered the illusion of safety. It started with a silence that felt heavier than usual. Grace Monroe, a 26-year-old librarian, failed to show up for her evening book club. Friends called her phone, sent messages, and finally stopped by her apartment, a small unit above a bakery on Maple Street. The door was locked and lights glowed faintly from inside, but no one answered. Concern grew quickly, and when the landlord used a spare key to open the door, what they found was worse than anyone could have imagined. Grace lay motionless on the living room floor, a broken picture frame beside her and a faint trace of perfume lingering in the air as if someone had been there only moments before. The police arrived swiftly, but the scene offered few clues. There was no sign of forced entry, no obvious struggle beyond the shattered frame, and nothing of value appeared to be missing. It was as if someone had stepped into Grace's life, taken everything that mattered most, and vanished without a sound. Officers canvassed the building, questioning neighbors who spoke of hearing a soft thud earlier in the evening, but nothing more. Some claimed to have noticed a shadowy figure lingering near the bakery's back entrance days before, but details were vague and memories uncertain. The lack of clear evidence sent a ripple of unease through the community. By the next morning, news of the murder spread across Willow Creek like wildfire. Parents held their children closer, shop owners installed locks they'd never needed before, and residents who once left windows open at night now secured them tightly. Whispers filled the local diner where theories ranged from a jealous ex-lover to a stranger passing through town. Everyone had a guess, but no one had answers. The idea that someone capable of such violence might still be walking among them was almost too much to bear. Grace had been beloved by many, kind, gentle, the type of person who remembered birthdays and volunteered at the local animal shelter. That someone could harm her felt unthinkable. As days turned into weeks, investigators worked tirelessly, but the case refused to break open. They collected fingerprints, analyzed the broken frame, and reviewed hours of surveillance footage from nearby businesses. Still, nothing concrete emerged. Willow Creek's once comfortable rhythms gave way to a tense stillness, every unfamiliar sound sparking suspicion. For the first time in memory, the town felt like a place where danger could be hiding behind any smile. The murder of Grace Monroe was more than a crime. It was a wound, a reminder that even the most peaceful places can hold dark secrets waiting to surface. Emily Carter returned to Willow Creek just as the investigation into Grace Monroe's death reached a frustrating standstill. After 5 years of living in a busy city, she had imagined her move back home as a chance to breathe again. She pictured quiet walks under the towering oaks, morning coffee at the corner cafe, and evenings spent catching up with old friends. Instead, she arrived to find a town on edge, where every glance carried suspicion and every conversation eventually circled back to the unsolved murder. Posters with Grace's photograph were taped to telephone poles, a constant reminder of the tragedy that had unsettled the community. Emily tried to settle into her small rented house on the edge of town, telling herself that life had to continue despite the fear that lingered in every shadow. She had left behind a demanding job and a painful breakup, eager for a clean start. Her relationship with Mark Dillon had ended nearly a year earlier, and though the split was messy, she believed time had dulled the sharpest memories. Mark had once been charming and attentive, the kind of man who could make anyone feel like the only person in the room. But he also carried a streak of unpredictability, moments of sudden anger that left Emily uneasy. When she left, she promised herself she would never look back. It didn't take long for her past to resurface. Mark still lived in Willow Creek, working as a handyman for local businesses and occasionally helping neighbors with repairs. Emily first saw him at the grocery store only a few days after moving in. He smiled as if nothing had changed, a polite nod that left her heart racing in ways she couldn't explain. Their meeting was brief and awkward, but it stirred memories she thought she had buried. She told herself it was just a coincidence. After all, Willow Creek was small, and chance encounters were inevitable. Then detectives released a vague description of a man seen near Grace's apartment on the night of the murder. Witnesses mentioned a tall figure wearing a dark jacket and a scar running across his left hand. The detail of the scar caught Emily off guard. Mark had one in the exact same place, earned years ago when he cut himself fixing a broken fence. At first, she brushed it aside. Scars weren't rare, and eyewitness accounts were often unreliable. But the image stayed with her, returning whenever she closed her eyes. As the weeks passed, Emily noticed Mark more often. Once he appeared at the local farmer's market just as she arrived, offering a casual wave from across the stalls. Another time, she spotted his truck parked near the jogging path where she ran each morning. Each encounter seemed innocent on its own, but together they formed a pattern she couldn't ignore. Though he never approached her directly, his presence felt deliberate, like a quiet reminder that their lives were still connected. What unsettled her most was the way he looked exactly the same as before, familiar, friendly, and impossible to read. The investigation into Grace Monroe's murder dragged on, and with each passing day the unease in Willow Creek grew heavier. People avoided walking alone at night, and local businesses began closing earlier than usual. Emily Carter tried to keep her life as normal as possible, but a creeping sense of dread followed her everywhere. Rumors about the killer spread like wildfire, each story more frightening than the last. Some believed an outsider was responsible, a stranger passing through who had vanished without a trace. Others whispered that the murderer had to be someone local, someone who blended in so perfectly that nobody suspected a thing. That thought lingered in Emily's mind more than she wanted to admit. 2 more attacks sent fresh waves of panic through the town. Both victims were young women who managed to escape after being ambushed in dimly lit areas. Their accounts were chillingly similar. Each described a man who approached with a calm, almost friendly demeanor before suddenly turning violent. Both remembered the flash of a scar on his left hand, a detail that matched the description released after Grace's murder. Police worked tirelessly, setting up checkpoints and combing through tips, but the attacker always seemed one step ahead. The lack of progress only deepened the fear that he might strike again. For Emily, the reports brought back the same unsettling image of Mark Dillon. She tried to reason with herself, telling her anxious thoughts to quiet down, but the coincidences were impossible to ignore. Mark had that same scar, the same tall frame, and a way of moving that matched what witnesses described. Even worse were the chance encounters that kept happening despite her efforts to avoid him. He appeared at the gas station when she stopped for fuel late one evening, leaning casually against his truck as if waiting for someone. He showed up at a hardware store she rarely visited, offering a friendly nod before disappearing down an aisle. Each time, Emily felt her stomach twist with a mix of fear and disbelief. Her unease turned to alarm one rainy night when she returned home from work to find an old photograph of herself and Mark slipped under her front door. The picture was from happier times, taken during a summer picnic years earlier, but its sudden reappearance felt threatening. There was no note, no explanation, just the smiling faces of a couple who no longer existed. Emily stood frozen in her entryway, the sound of the rain pounding on the roof matching the racing of her heart. She checked the locks twice before finally sitting down, clutching the photo as questions swirled in her mind. How had someone gotten so close to her home without being seen? Emily began noticing other small but unsettling details. A faint smell of cigarette smoke near her back porch even though she didn't smoke. Footprints in the mud that didn't match her own. The sense of being watched became impossible to dismiss. Sleep grew difficult, and each creak of the house set her nerves on edge. While the rest of Willow Creek worried about a faceless predator, Emily feared she might already know exactly who the killer was and that he might be watching her every move. Emily spent the following days in a fog of fear and restless energy, unable to focus on work or even simple routines. She avoided answering calls from friends, worried that her voice would betray the panic she was trying to hide. The photograph slipped under her door replayed in her mind like a warning she couldn't escape. Each time she looked at it, she wondered whether Mark was trying to remind her of the past or send a message about the present. The police still had no suspect in custody, and the man with the scar continued to haunt local news reports. Emily felt trapped between the comfort of familiarity and the terrifying suspicion that someone she once loved might be responsible for the violence shaking the town. Unable to quiet her thoughts, she began going through old belongings late at night, hoping for clarity. In a cardboard box tucked away in the back of her closet, she found a collection of keepsakes from her relationship with Mark, photos, handwritten notes, and ticket stubs from concerts and movies they had attended. At first, the items felt harmless, even nostalgic, but as she sifted deeper, small details began to unsettle her. A note in Mark's neat handwriting mentioned a work trip that had taken him out of town 3 years earlier, a trip she had never questioned at the time. The date matched a newspaper clipping she discovered folded between 2 photographs. It described an unsolved assault in a neighboring county, eerily similar to the attacks now terrorizing Willow Creek. Her chest tightened as she realized Mark had claimed to be away on business that very week. She searched for more connections, pulling out old calendars and text messages saved on an old phone. Patterns began to emerge, gaps of time when Mark's whereabouts were vague, excuses that suddenly felt rehearsed. The anger he sometimes displayed, the way he could switch from charm to cold silence in an instant, now seemed like pieces of a much darker puzzle. Each memory sharpened the growing suspicion that the man she had once trusted might have been hiding violent impulses all along. What had once felt like coincidences now appeared as calculated moves, carefully masked behind his easy smile. Emily knew she couldn't keep what she found to herself. The next morning, she gathered the clipping and a list of dates that matched Mark's unexplained absences and drove to the police station. Her hands trembled as she handed over the evidence, half expecting the officers to dismiss her concerns as nothing more than the paranoia of a worried ex-girlfriend. Instead, the detective who met with her listened intently, his expression tightening as he compared her information with the details of the ongoing investigation. It was clear that Mark Dillon had already been on their radar, though they lacked the proof needed to bring him in. Leaving the station, Emily felt both relief and dread. She had finally shared what she knew, but the knowledge that Mark was still free weighed heavily on her. Each shadow on the street seemed sharper, every unfamiliar sound more threatening. The town remained on edge, but Emily now carried a far heavier burden, the terrifying possibility that the killer everyone feared might not be a stranger at all, but the man she had once loved. The breakthrough came on an overcast morning when detectives finally received the lab results they had been waiting for. A discarded coffee cup retrieved from a trash bin near Mark Dillon's truck carried a DNA match to the evidence found in Grace Monroe's apartment. The confirmation sent a quiet shock through the department. After weeks of searching and false leads, the name that emerged was not a mysterious drifter or a stranger passing through town, but someone who had been living among them all along. Mark was placed under discreet surveillance while investigators built their case, determined to ensure there would be no chance for him to slip away. Emily was informed of the development only after Mark's arrest was certain. Early one evening, police moved in while he worked at a small renovation site on the edge of town. He was taken into custody without incident, his calm demeanor chilling to the officers who expected resistance. In interviews, he initially denied any involvement, insisting he was being framed. But the evidence was overwhelming. Along with the DNA match, detectives had collected fibers from his clothing that matched those found at the crime scenes, as well as a set of tools bearing traces of blood too degraded to identify but damning enough to strengthen the case. As details emerged, a disturbing picture of Mark's hidden life came into focus. Investigators uncovered records of unexplained trips over several years, each aligning with reports of assaults or attempted attacks in neighboring counties. Neighbors recalled moments when he disappeared for days, always returning with vague stories of work projects or visits to relatives. Friends described him as quiet and charming, someone who never raised suspicion. The contrast between the man they thought they knew and the predator revealed by the investigation left the community stunned. He had moved among them for years, unnoticed and undetected, while carrying out acts of violence that now seemed impossible to reconcile with his friendly smile. When confronted with the full weight of the evidence, Mark finally confessed to Grace Monroe's murder and the attacks that followed. He spoke of impulses he claimed he could not control, his tone disturbingly detached as he described how he chose his victims. For Emily, the revelation was both horrifying and surreal. She had shared her life with him, trusted him, and once believed he was the person who would always keep her safe. Now she had to face the reality that the man she once loved had been capable of unimaginable cruelty all along. The trial moved swiftly, the prosecution presenting a case so strong that a conviction was inevitable. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the courtroom, Emily sat quietly, her face composed but her heart heavy. The town of Willow Creek slowly began to breathe again as locks were replaced and routines cautiously resumed, but the sense of innocence they once held was gone. For Emily, the discovery left a permanent scar, a reminder that evil can wear the face of someone once trusted, and that even the most familiar smile can hide a darkness no one sees until it is too late.